everybody? Greg Refner with Contact Center KPI podcast, and I have Nate Nammour with us from ShyftOff. He is the director of partnerships, and super excited to chat with you, Nate. We're going to be talking gig economy for contact centers, which is not something we've talked about on our podcast. So, Nate, please take a moment to introduce yourself.
Greg, great to be here. Yeah, so I oversee our partnerships at ShyftOff. We are a US-based gig-powered contact center, and I think we do a lot of good things in the space. And it's just it's an emerging alternative to traditional contact and call centers in the States and abroad as well. So really excited to be here today.
Yeah, so when we first met, Nate, I was like, I don't know why, like I hadn't thought of it, but you got like Uber, you got DoorDash, you got like all these like emerging like gig economies across other industries. The moment you told me about this, it just made so much sense given the fact that most contact centers and call centers have such a problem with attrition. And it's almost like,
hmm
why have I not heard about this before? So like, talk to me a little bit about the history of ShyftOff, kind of how y'all came up with this idea, and let's lay some
Yeah,
kind of foundation for kind of why this became a thing.
yeah. So we were founded in 2020, the early part of it. And so the idea, I think, started stemming in 2018, 2019. And our founder and CEO, Trevor Clark, was working for a fairly significant, a huge sized telecommunications firm. And he oversaw a lot of the analytics and contact center, tons of different things that he was really, responsible for. And he always has this story where he has this issue, right? Where he would have these individuals staffed and his contact center agents staffed from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then when people, like the American people, got off of work, they would call in at 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. to talk about the billing, to talk about whatever issues that their account had. But the issue was all of the staff, or 70% of the staff, would go home for the evening. So it was, oh my gosh, constant overtime. It was, how do we forecast staffing so when we have people from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., because we really don't need it from 5 p.m. to midnight, but we really need it for like about 4 hour research. And it was really, that's impactful to customer experiences, right? And so he had this idea where, why don't we create a business model and a contact center that really can fit every single interval and match up workforce management to anticipated volume for a specific client, but have the right people at the right time exactly when you need it. And so that's
Yeah.
really what inspired ShyftOff.
I mean, it's so true, right? Because some folks have the luxury of, maybe working from home or something like that, where they can
Right.
maybe, handle like account maintenance stuff or support requests like during their lunch break or during the middle of their day. But then there's an entire percentage of the population that maybe they're construction workers or they're out in the field all day and they don't have access to sit in front of a computer until they get home. And like, it's just like, duh, that makes so much sense. Um, so I guess just to kind of dive into that, like how did that go from, hey, we have a business model over here that we've identified of there's a volume of calls that needs to be handled, but
Right.
then it's why not just hire, shift workers from like 5 till midnight? Like why turn that into more of a gig economy where it's like come work when you want to work, don't work when you don't want to work? Like how'd that evolution take place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really hard for traditional centers, and this is based off my personal experience. So I don't want to come across like being just a theory guy here, but I used to work for a traditional firm and they were fantastic. But it's really complicated when you mix the two, right? Because your whole business model, when you think about it, might be set up for traditional W-2 workers. And to introduce 1099, I mean, for obvious reasons, but legal stuff and how you're going to manage these individuals, and it's a different type of person too, which I think that's really an important part of this is, when you get a W-2 call center agent and you get a 1099 gig worker call center agent, their mentalities are completely different. Okay, so it's very difficult to manage it and to do a hybrid model. Now, some of our clients are actually traditional call centers and they're really great with us and they actually do a hybrid model, but the hybrid model is actually through us, right? So we augment gig workers on their accounts. to actually flex up and down the staffing and meet the intervals or weekly volume, monthly volume, annual volume that they can't do, right? Because it's a lot of training, it's a lot of costs associated with it. And then also, they don't have this trigger to go up, down, stagnant, right? So when we thought about, okay, how are we going to create this? It was never really a question of we're just going to go strictly gig, but also gig workers are very used to, and this is why you're a gig worker, is you have autonomy and independence of the hours you work, right? So like Uber, for example. So that's a fantastic feature to have as any individual, right? Sometimes it takes people years in a career to start, okay, I'm going to set my own schedule. I'm just going to set a couple hours during the day where I take meetings, I don't take meetings, whatever. As a gig worker, that's your entire life. Okay, so you really have to embrace that and understand that there's going to be different thinking. Now, I would argue all the time that, if a gig worker or an individual is signing up to work a shift and they're transparent and honest with you that, hey, I'm going to be here for 6 hours and here are the 6 hours I'm going to be at, well, they get paid to work those 6 hours. They're going to show up. If you have a W-2 worker that's showing up for 40 hours a week, they may not, they're going to probably take off some time potentially.
They're
And
gonna
not
get
only
30. You're gonna get 30 out of those 40.
maybe if you're lucky, that's really close, Greg. So we actually calculated like 65% of
Okay.
productivity. So it's about 26 hours,
Okay.
even on a W-2 traditional call center. So that 30 is actually really close. So when we talk about, hey, how many hours does a gig agent work? It's like, well, they're going to work about 70 to 80% of a 40-hour work week, but it's only productive time. So if you're comparing it to, I have a call center agent that's working 40 hours a week, they're not working 40 hours a week. They're showing up for 40 hours a week if you're lucky, but the amount of time they're actually like available to take a call, fielding a call, on the call, doing after call work is only about 60 to 65%. Right? The other times they're in meetings, they're in qualities, they're in breaks, they're in other activities that you can't track them down. It's really difficult. So with the gig agents, like they know that when they sign up for those 6 hours, they're signing up to work for those 6 hours. They're not signing up to not be available for those 6 hours. Otherwise, they wouldn't be being a gig worker. So for us, we had to really create a business model that incentivized, managed the gig economy. And we did a lot of that through the technology and the contact center platform that we're building. So agents, have the full flexibility and ability to go into our ShyftOff agent platform and pick the hours they work, and then also see how their performance is. And based on that performance is actually like how they get priority in picking shifts that, fit their schedule, which for a gig worker is really everything. You have to have that. So you have to be able to pick the hours and get the hours that you need. Otherwise, as a gig worker, it's really considered like there's no work, there's no hours to be made. So the better you perform, the better shifts are available. It's a win-win situation. So for us, I think to answer it from like a wholesome perspective is the whole business model is around gig. It's not around W-2, and it can't be. We have to be fully focused on thinking about, what gig workers want, how are they wired, what can we expect from them, and, how do they interact? What's their personality? And it's completely different. It's completely different than a W-2 worker.
So let's unpack something there for a second. So we try to dive into like numbers and tactical things to take away on this
Go
podcast.
ahead.
And so you mentioned 64% is like a typical percentage of a 40-hour work week. And then you said like 70, 80% for a gig worker. So you're seeing anywhere from, math was never my strong suit, but anywhere between like 4 to 14% in incremental like
Yeah,
work time
productivity. Hmm.
productivity just by giving people the flexibility to work whenever they want, um, which I'm sure I'm sure your clients love the fact that they're getting more for their money, right?
Yeah, so there's a couple things on that. That's exactly what we see. But also when I'm talking about, building and incentivizing the model for gig workers to be more productive, but also managing it, you know, w- we essentially customize an algorithm that we call, actually we call it priority boarding. And what it does is
Hmm.
whatever KPIs that are important for our clients, right? So you can pick three, whether it's handle time, inbound sales conversion, whatever it is. We're actually going to take that data on the agent level and we're going to essentially stack rank and score our agents. And what that does is it puts every agent that's on a specific campaign in three buckets, 1, 2, and 3. Your guys in the one are going to have the first priority of shifts because they're the higher performing agents that are tied exactly to client KPIs, okay? And then you go down to 2 and 3. So those 2 and 3 may never even pick up shifts in a certain week because the ones are always getting the shifts. Now you have always opportunities from 2 and 3 to get up there, but it's quick, you got to stay really high performing. So that's really how we increase productivity, because our agents know that to be able to get the autonomy in scheduling and to be able to make more, money, because as a gig worker, your earnings is really uncapped, right? Your ceiling is the more you work and the better you perform, you're making as much money as you possibly want, which is different than a W-2, right? And so that's how they're incentivized in a sense in our back end, where they know that the more they work and the better they perform from a quality perspective, performance, whatever you want to call it, they're going to end up with more money in their pocket.
I love that. I mean, it's people self-select into which bucket they want, and
Right.
then it's almost like surge pricing, right? Like, or like the black limo version of Uber, right? You kind of
Sure.
have to earn your way
Yeah.
into being able to drive that. So, um, how does this model impact attrition? Like, do you
Yeah.
see your agents like in bucket one stay longer? Are you beating industry norms in terms of agent attrition? Kind of talk to me about that a little bit.
So, yeah, it's a great question. So, part of the reason why I was actually so thrilled to join ShyftOff and what our model is because I had significant issues with brick and mortar attrition, right, for traditional call centers. And I'm not talking about attrition just with people leaving, you can't get a hold of them, but people not showing up to work, which is essentially shrinkage, but it also factors into attrition. So, what we decided to do is we said, we're all in the US and we're all remote, and we have access to 37 different states where we can, attract really high talent, high individual talent. So what we're going to do is every time a client brings on with us and they sign with ShyftOff and they say, hey, we need 30 people to work, we're going to bring on 90 to 150. Now that's on our dime. We don't ever charge our clients that. But what it allows us to do is it behooves both of us, because we are able to performance manage and weed out the people who really aren't a fit or don't want to be here or are performing really poorly, and then the technology kind of takes care of that itself. And the second big thing it does is for clients is it always solves attrition. So we have attrition like any call center and contact center, any company in the world, but our attrition is really only front end. So we never have the back end attrition where you're going to see companies put a class of 20 FTE and they're going through the classes, the 2-3 week training, and then they graduate 10 of that, which is,
Yeah.
about 50 to 70% graduation rate is pretty standard in the industry, right, for call center. So now you're already down 5 to 7 people. Well, you brought on 20 for a reason. So now you need to backfill those 7. So what that would do in a traditional model, and how we can beat that, is they would have to put on a new class, and that's hiring, that's more resources, it's more time, the volume may have already been there, the service levels may have already been killed, client experience might have been shot. What we're able to do is say, hey, you know what? The people who drop out, well, you only needed 30, we brought in 120, now we're down to 80. Okay, and then give it a week, everyone goes through training. Okay, 60 people graduated training. Okay, now the other question is, well, how do you put those 60 people? Because we don't overstaff, we just align it up for the forecast and the scheduling. Well, if we have data on them prior, they're already grouped into priority shift, or it's, hey, first come, first serve, because everybody graduated training, which, by the way, for us is completely self-paced and it's pass or fail, so we don't do any scoring. So essentially, like, you can't go through a shift off training, score 90%, and you miss that 10%, but it's okay. You were good enough. You're in. You got to pass every single quiz, every single test, every single module flawlessly. And once you do, you're in, and you have the ability and I guess the privilege to pick and to work your shift. You kind of become a gig worker there. So when we have people drop off, whether they're on the campaign, they don't like it, they don't want to sign up the next day, well, we're just opening more shifts for our already mass pool that graduated training. So our clients are never looking and seeing, oh my gosh, we don't have staff. It's always filled. So again, we have attrition, but it's only in the front end, and it's never really felt for clients because we're already having the staff and we're prioritizing them. And then we have a 2 to 3x ratio that we want to make sure that we stay, so that in case we have a surge and we need people to come up, it's not a training. It's not going through and waiting 2 to 3 weeks. It's, okay, great, these people already finished training. Now they're going to jump on for this day or these 3 hours to combat attrition or shrinkage. So yes, we have attrition, but the nice thing I think if you ask any of our clients is it's never really felt unless like it's a random occurrence where somebody says, hey, we have 100% double our call volume today that we didn't foresee coming. We'll do our best within a couple hours to get more people on. But from a month to week over week attrition, the only thing you're really worried about with us in monitoring it is just who are those better agents. So like we want to go through the time to get the tech and to make sure who's the best agents. But from an attrition perspective, it's never felt because we're doing all the work on the front end in one batch and we're not doing it retroactively. It's always a proactive thought. So, from an industry perspective, I don't know if anybody can beat gig from an attrition perspective because you're bringing in a mass pool of agents. And then if you're doing it correctly and responsibly, you're, really filtering it down to the best possible agents in the United States.
I mean, I think it's genius. And again, I love you do it at your own pace, right? So you kind of get out of training, and then the folks that are hungry and motivated, they're going to go take that
Exactly.
test like within 24 hours, and then they're going to have, when the shifts get opened up, like they're going to be the first ones that raise their hand and have access to that. And people like that are going to kind of fall into the typical Pareto distribution where the 20% account for 80% of the productivity, and like they're just going to be the ones that stay at the top all the time.
Yeah, it puts the accountability on the agent. And so I think you can really access and unlock elite talent through gig in the United States. I mean, it's a whole business model. It's, you got to do it, like I said, extremely responsibly. And so we've got a lot of things from a tech perspective that we do on the front end and the back end to make sure that, we're continuing and keeping our elite talent and making sure that they're rewarded and they're happy. And also that like we have guardrails where, you can't just sign up for ShyftOff tomorrow and work on a company or client. That's impossible with us. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, it puts all the accountability on an agent. And then the idea is, if you built the model and the business successfully, well, then, you're never really worried about having bad people. You're just really working with the client on the day to day and increasing KPIs and working with your outliers. And you're never having fires that come up because of staffing. And I think
Yeah.
that's really what's the difference maker with gig.
So kind of to wrap our time up here, Nate. Let's say, I'm a business, right? And I don't want to go outsource to kind of someone like ShiftOff. I want to try to build this internally. I don't want you to give away your secrets, but maybe like what's one thing that I can think of if I as a means of kind of exploring this as an option for us. Maybe like, is it like a kind of like a decision tree? How do I decide if this is right for me as a business or not? This kind of business model.
If you're talking about like an internal center and contact center that wants to go gig, I think you really got to look at, honestly, it's it's a tough one, but I would probably start with, you know, what does your call volume look like, or what does your clientele base look like, and you got to look at historical figures, and I think figure out, am I handling the calls? Am I meeting my service levels? Are my clients happy? Are my customers happy? If they're not happy, why? Do I have high abandon rates? And I think if you start saying yes, yes, and yes, then I think that's your first probably green light to say, you know what, the how I'm set up now, whatever it may be, is not right. And I think that takes a lot of courage. I think all of our clients that we work with, we love them. But the reason why we love them is not because they're a client, but also they're very forward thinkers. They saw a problem. They sought us out and said, we need a solution to this problem, and we're going to kind of go on with you on the ride, and we're going to learn. And here's this problem we're solving. Let's solve it together. So I think it takes a lot of courage too to transition, because the call center industry, the contact center industry, has been stagnant for a very long time. And I think we're just starting to see the rep with the uses of AI and gig workforce coming into it. And so, I think also you got to be a forward thinker too. I think if you're stuck in the same ways, you'll never be successful introducing something like this.
Yeah, that's totally fair. What about one thing that like hasn't worked? What's one thing I should probably never try if I'm trying to introduce this into my business?
If you're trying to introduce gig,
Yeah.
yeah, I think you should never try to bring on talent without proper uh, recruiting tools.
Okay.
We actually use AI to help recruit. So we basically built out agent profiles and have AI kind of dwindle down based off of resumes and keywords, like who are the best agents potentially that have access to training. I would the great thing about Gig is you have access to everybody in the world almost in a sense, because it's a free marketplace. But I would never go in it without a really strong plan for recruiting and identifying talent. Whether that's you're going to go with people or you're going to introduce tech like AI like we do, you got to have recruiting figured out so that you don't get an excess of millions of applicants, and then how do you dwindle that down? Like how are you picking the best individual agents potentially? And so that's a big question mark, I think, for a lot of people. And so we do it again like through AI, but you got to have some guardrails around that. So if you don't have a good recruiting plan in place or a way to identify talent and scale that talent down, because you're going to get a lot, then I don't even know where you would start.
That's totally fair. Now, one of our previous podcasts, it wasn't really something I ever thought of, but like that, if you kind of even think um, kind of earlier in the life cycle of someone coming to join your organization, it starts at like recruiting. How do I get in front of this many people? It's like that funnel, right? How do I
Right.
funnel the people down into my hiring class of 90 people? If I'm looking at 10,000 people and I need the 90, knowing I'm going to
Hmm.
get 60. So,
Right.
kind of having that recruiting plan in place because to your point, like you almost have to have, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but you almost have to have more than you need um, to make this work because then you want the kind of the top tier, your elite folks are going to kind of fill ultimately what you need. Um,
Right.
so I love that. Well, I appreciate you joining us, Nate. This is I've been super excited to chat with you ever since we first met a couple weeks ago, and I think that I think we'll see more of this kind of approach to contact centers. Um, and it sounds like you guys are on the bleeding edge. You've already probably learned a lot of things that folks still haven't even thought of. So I appreciate you sharing that with some of our listeners today. And yeah, thank you for your time today.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your day, Nate. We'll talk soon.
Bye bye. See you
Bye.
guys.